January 1945. The forests near Merzig, Germany. Freezing darkness hangs over a silent pine woods as an American infantry company moves in single file. Snow muffles their boots, branches scrape against helmets. A young lieutenant steps forward, holding out a small brass compass to his commander, its needle glowing faint green in the dark. The captain pushes the metal instrument away with a gloved hand and points forward into the shadows. He relies on his internal radar, stepping blindly off the trail. Moments later, explosions tear through the tree line. Tracers rip through the dark from 3 different directions as 19 men fall into a hidden trap. They are exactly 3 miles off course, walking directly into prepared German defenses because one man trusted his instinct over mathematics. General George S. Patton will soon confront this blind arrogance with a punishment that turns a tiny tool into a lesson a broken commander will never forget. This is the story of a midnight march through the freezing German timber, where a commander rejected a simple brass compass and guided his men straight into an ambush. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We tell the World War, 2 stories that show the moment pride became a death sentence. Second Lieutenant William Tanaka was 23 years old. He came from Portland, Oregon, a city of cold rains and towering timber that felt a world away from the shattered landscapes of Western Europe. He served as a platoon leader in the infantry, a young officer who had spent months studying grid coordinates, magnetic deviations, and topographic contours at officer candidate school. He believed in numbers because numbers did not lie when the sky was black and the terrain was unfamiliar. Tanaka had survived the brutal meat grinder of the autumn campaigns, watching friends vanish into the mud, a personal toll that left him quiet, watchful, and intensely protective of the men under his direct supervision. He had spent his afternoon carefully plotting their route on a standard tactical map, calculating the exact degree of drift they would encounter in the dense thickets. He knew the math was flawless, and he held the brass compass tight in his hand as the winter twilight faded. Captain Raymond Sloan was 35 years old and hailed from Nashville, Tennessee. He was a veteran company commander who wore a crisp, tailored winter overcoat and kept his leather boots polished, despite the clinging mud of the front lines. Sloan possessed an unshakable, unearned confidence rooted in his upbringing as a self-taught woodsman in the southern wilderness. He openly mocked the technical manuals, frequently telling his subordinates that formal military land navigation was nothing more than a crutch for men who could not read the natural flow of the terrain. He had drifted slightly off course during 2 previous night operations, but luck had favored him, and his units had reached their objectives without taking fire. These minor errors had never been corrected, reinforcing his dangerous belief that his internal radar was superior to any military instrument. He viewed his instincts as infallible, a natural gift passed down through generations, far superior to the mechanical tools issued by the United States Army. By January 1945, the Allied advance into the heart of Europe had transformed into a grinding, frozen battle of attrition. The Ardennes offensive had severely strained the American lines, leaving units shattered, exhausted, and scattered across dense, snow-covered border regions. The dense forests surrounding Merzig were particularly treacherous, filled with deep ravines, thick secondary growth, and blinding winter blizzards that completely obscured the sun and stars for days at a time. In this chaotic environment, a single navigation error could easily prove fatal. The German defenders had spent months preparing their positions, mapping every clearing, and zeroing in their machine guns and heavy mortars on the logical avenues of approach. They were waiting in the darkness, dug into fortified bunkers and deep trenches, invisible to the naked eye. Supply lines were constantly broken, communications were highly unreliable, and the pressure on company commanders to maintain momentum was intense. In the rush to secure objectives, higher headquarters frequently overlooked minor navigation errors, assuming that as long as a unit reached its destination, the exact route did not matter. Senior officers had let small deviations slide during the autumn advance, creating a dangerous culture of carelessness among certain overconfident commanders who believed they could outsmart the terrain. This institutional leniency allowed arrogance to fester in the officer corps, setting the stage for disaster when the division ordered a critical night movement through the blacked-out wilderness. The safety margins were entirely gone, and the dense pine forests near Merzig had zero tolerance for human ego. The company assembled in the freezing darkness under the heavy cover of the pine canopy. Lieutenant Tanaka held his map case under his arm, shielding a small flashlight with his gloved hand as he checked his coordinates one final time. He stepped toward the company commander, checking the luminescent dial on his instrument. Patton, the pre-plotted bearing from the operations section is 2 degrees east of north, Tanaka said. Captain Sloan did not look at the map, keeping his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. We do not need the brass toy tonight, Lieutenant, Sloan said. Sir, the timber is dense and the visibility is less than 10 yards, Tanaka said. Put that away, Sloan said. The division paperwork does not account for the natural drift of the ridges, Tanaka said. My father taught me to navigate by stars and instinct before I could read, Sloan said. There are no stars visible through this cloud cover, sir, Tanaka said. I know these ridges by the feel of the slope under my boots, Sloan said. The math shows we are drifting towards the western draw, Tanaka said. I navigate by feel and I know exactly where north is, Sloan said. We are walking away from our objective, Tanaka said. Follow my lead and keep your mouth shut, Lieutenant, Sloan said. Tanaka stepped back into the column, keeping his fingers tightly gripped around the brass casing of his instrument as the company moved deeper into the thickets. The slope descended sharply, breaking away from the ridge line that led to their designated objective. Tanaka watched the column bend toward the dark valley, the silhouette of the trees growing thicker and more oppressive with every 100 yards. He walked up to the command group again, his boots crunching softly on the frozen crust of snow. Sir, my instrument shows we have drifted 3 miles northwest of our coordinate, Tanaka said. I told you to stop looking at that crutch, Sloan said. We are entering a sector that hasn't been cleared by our cavalry recon, Tanaka said. The terrain is opening up exactly where I expected it to, Sloan said. This is a prepared defensive draw for the enemy, Tanaka said. I am the commander of this company, and I do not take orders from a piece of metal, Sloan said. The men are walking straight into a pocket, Tanaka said. Get back to your platoon before I have you relieved for insubordination, Sloan said. Tanaka fell back, his chest tight as he watched the lead scouts disappear into the black mouth of the ravine. Moments later, the first flare hissed into the sky, exposing the entire column in a blinding white glare. The machine guns opened up from the ridges above, pinning the men down in the open snow. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His open-top Jeep pulled up to the muddy command tent, the engine idling low in the freezing mountain air. 4 polished silver stars glinted on his helmet, and the ivory handles of his revolvers rested against his hips. The general stepped out into the snow, his face set like cold marble. Every officer in the tent froze, dropping their gaze as his boots clicked against the wooden floorboards. He did not yell. He walked straight to the map table where Sloan stood waiting. Sloan, Patton said. Yes, General, Sloan said. Where was your assigned objective last night? Patton asked. 2 miles due east, near the ridgeline, Sloan said. Where did your company take fire? Patton asked. 3 miles northwest, in the valley draw, Sloan said. Did your platoon leader offer you a pre-plotted bearing before you marched? Patton asked. He did, General, but the terrain looked different than the paper coordinates, Sloan said. You refused the instrument, Patton said. General, I navigate by my own sense of direction, Sloan said. Your feel was 5 miles off and 19 men bled for it, Patton said. A compass costs 50 cents, Patton said. It has no ego. It does not possess a hometown or a father who taught it how to read the clouds. It does not guess, and it does not try to prove how smart it is to a column of frightened infantrymen. It simply points toward magnetic north. Every single time, you walked into a valley where the enemy had been waiting for months, Patton said. You walked your men into a crossfire because you believed your own blood was a better tool than the standard issue equipment of the United States Army. You traded the lives of 19 soldiers to protect the myth of your own natural instincts. The Army has plenty of use for men who understand mathematics, Patton said. It has absolutely no use for commanders who believe their feelings are superior to the laws of geometry. You are going to take this instrument right now. You have two choices. You will either learn to look at the needle every 5 minutes, or you will pack your gear and find another profession where your arrogance won't cost the taxpayers 19 good men. Sloan looked down at the floorboards, his face turning bright red in the lantern light. His hands trembled as he reached out and took the small metal casing from the table. He did not speak. Patton stepped back, his boots clicking on the floorboards as he turned to his military police escorts. He ordered them to strip the captain of his sidearm and map case right there in front of the entire division staff. The general then looked directly at Lieutenant Tanaka and promoted him to full company command on the spot, handing him the tactical map of the Merzig sector. Sloan was marched out into the freezing courtyard, where a dozen waiting infantrymen from his own shattered company watched him line up in the snow. Under Patton's explicit directive, Sloan was stripped of his heavy winter overcoat and given a standard recruit rifle with no ammunition. His punishment was executed in full view of the camp. For the next 12 hours, Sloan was forced to march alone in a tight, 3-mile circle through the deep drifts surrounding the headquarters perimeter. The freezing wind whipped through his thin uniform shirt as the military police monitored his path from a heated jeep, forcing him to verify his exact magnetic heading with the 50-cent brass compass every single 100 yards. His fingers grew completely numb, and his polished boots split open in the crust of ice. The passing supply drivers and cold riflemen looked on in total silence, watching a man who had trusted his pride over mathematics freeze in the very wilderness he claimed to master. William Tanaka returned to Portland, Oregon, after the war ended, bringing home the brass compass he had kept through the worst of the winter fighting. He married his high school sweetheart, raised 3 children, and spent over 30 years working as a civil engineer for the state highway department, where his commitment to precise mathematical measurements became a hallmark of his long career. He rarely spoke about the frozen pine forests of Merzig, or the night his company drifted off course, but he kept the tiny brass instrument in a velvet-lined box on his desk until his peaceful death in 1984. Raymond Sloan survived his 12-hour march through the frozen perimeter, but the severe frostbite he suffered that night permanently damaged the tissue in his feet, leaving him with a pronounced, painful limp for the rest of his life. He was officially transferred out of the infantry division the following morning, spending the remainder of the war managing a remote supply depot in the rear echelons before being quietly discharged from the service in late 1945. He returned to Nashville, Tennessee, where he lived a bitter, reclusive existence, working as a night watchman at a lumber yard and refusing to ever look at a map or enter a forest again until his death in 1972. General George S. Patton never mentioned the incident in his public briefings or his personal diaries, viewing the correction of an arrogant officer as a routine administrative matter beneath the dignity of official military history. He did, however, write a brief note to a fellow commander in a private letter dated February 1945, detailing the high cost of human ego on the battlefield. In that letter, he remarked that a leader who relies on his feelings to guide his men through a dark woods will always find himself completely blind when the shooting starts. Some historians have argued that Patton's public humiliation of a veteran company commander was unnecessarily harsh and risked damaging the morale of the officer corps during a critical phase of the winter campaign. They contend that a quiet reprimand or a standard administrative transfer would have sufficed to correct the tactical error without creating a public spectacle. Others have argued the opposite, insisting that the general's dramatic intervention was entirely justified, given the catastrophic human cost of the captain's negligence. They maintain that a swift, memorable example was required to eradicate dangerous overconfidence and reinforce absolute discipline across the entire command, What is certain is that the company never deviated from its plotted coordinates again. If you had been in General Patton's position, would you have publicly humiliated a company commander to make a point? Or would you have quietly reassigned him to protect the integrity of the officer corps? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the moment pride became a death sentence, make sure to subscribe.